Do we have audio?
You're muted, Erica.
Lord. Okay, well, welcome to UFO Classified. We're a little bit late, but that's because Mama was having a little problem with the technical side and I didn't push the go live. So, Mario, you've got to keep track of me. Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Okay, Ted, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a bit echoey.
Okay, Hail Mary. So anyway, since we are not live and we've got to keep track of that, so anyway, thanks, Scott. I want to just start from the beginning so you all can catch up on this. And I'm really, really sorry, you guys. You rock. Thanks for keeping track of us and having a nice conversation for 10 minutes. You're amazing. So first of all, I want to go back and I'm going to read this now that I've had an extra chance to do this. And Scott has heard. I want to just say that in the past 3 weeks, Scott has had a very difficult time with his family. He's just lost his father-in-law from COVID, and we want him to know, because this is such a terrible time for his family, that we extend our love and gratitude to him. And I wanted to just read a few words that we have from people that love and support in the field and Scott Brown. This is from Warren Agelis. So a few words about Scott Brown. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more sincere, humble, thoughtful, and passionate human being. A man that calls out dishonesty with intense conviction, seemingly incorruptible. He's like the Elliot Ness of ufology. I love that line. That's a good one. And then from Scott's good friend, Will Smith. I'm grateful to call him a friend and a very often strong supporter of my personal efforts, and I can say that too. I've shared personal and ufology-related issues with him on several occasions, and his wise advice and guidance has been an anchor to me through those times. If you look up the voice of reason in the dictionary, you'll see his solid expression, no doubt. This is from Mario, who is our partner in crime here behind the scenes, and I don't know how Mario does it. He's been with on every show. He's been with me since the beginning, and I just adore him. Scott Brown was a guiding lighthouse from a safe harbor, from an ocean of assumptions and untruths. Being a skeptical experiencer, I liked what In the Field represented. Thanks to Allison Cruz for guiding me in the right direction. Scott is a no-nonsense type of guy and doesn't pull any punches. We need more like that in our crazy community. And amen, mister, we do need more like that. I am lucky to have Scott as my friend and co-host, and I'm also lucky to have Ted Roe, the executive director of NARCAP, as a friend and a colleague where I can really turn to him. I first became aware of NARCAP, and I'm not sure if it was Ted that reached out to me or I reached out to him. It was probably me reaching out to him. And from that time, we have been in close contact, sharing information, taking trips to a very special site where there is lots of activity. I think the Project Sphere on narcap.org is one of the best research papers that I have seen. The work that he is doing now is exceptional. And Ted, I'm going to have you explain again what you have been up to. See, I warmed you up. You just didn't know it. And then you guys had a great conversation.
It was good. It was good. Happy to share. Dr. Richard Haynes and I founded NARCAP in 1999. I had met him after being a private researcher for, probably 10 years. Trying to understand what UFOs were about, because they were something that happened to me, and I just needed to know more. And then they started happening again, and I contacted NASA, and Dr. Richard Haynes came out of the woodwork, and we became friends. And then he suggested a reporting center for collecting pilot reports because he felt there were aviation safety factors involved, and I thought that was intriguing. He wrote a paper called Aviation Safety in America, a previously neglected factor, which was kind of our first. It was an analysis of 100 cases involving safety factors and unidentifieds. And that was our sort of rationale to get started. And we set up a reporting center, which is NARCAP, and started collecting data. And we acquired about, in one study, one of our associates, Dominic Weinstein, collected 1,300 pilot case reports from around the world. And Dr. Haynes had another 3,000 that he had pulled together on his own. So we had a reasonably, reasonable sized data set to start making some initial cuts and trying to develop preliminary findings. And the results of that were what I presented at this conference for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics a couple of weeks ago.
And I have to say that I think, I just had to, Mama's having a little hot flash here. I'm telling you, starting late, it just kind of flustered me. But so Ted, I mean, I've been talking to you, and we talk, several times a week about a lot of different things, the state of ufology, about research and all sorts of things. And so I've been really excited. You and I have been through ups and downs in each other's, time in this field. And so I've seen you take bumps and bruises, but I have to say that you've done nothing but persevere. And I have a lot of respect for what you've done. And I'm really excited for you and this new opportunity to present factual information and to get scientists involved, to get this to a place it really should be, and out of the hands of people that are talking about plastic aliens and giving anonymous confessions and all sorts of things, trying to make money and not really provide integrity to this work.
Well, I agree. There are a lot of pitfalls in this field, and it's a learning curve. I started as an experiencer, and then I became an administrator of a dream team by most standards. I had Dr. Valee and Dr. Haynes and Dr. Heisch, and about 60 other aviation professionals and UFO researchers, to administrate for, and that sort of kept me on the straight and narrow with my own behavior and the things I had to say. But there are pitfalls, and there are personalities and energies moving in this field that are dangerous. You have to be careful around them. When I finally took over NARCAP in 2015, as you know, I restructured the entire organization and just kind of turned my back towards ufology for the most part and focused on the mission, what we were trying to do and trying to serve our demographic. And I felt that if we could change the aviation system, we could change the world. And I think that's kind of what's happening.
See, I'm so happy for you. I mean, this is really, really cool. And so tell us a little bit about Dr. Haynes, because I have a lot of his books in my collection, and I really actually like this book, Observing UFOs. It's very, very interesting, and we're going to talk about some points. It really, really is. And then Project Delta and CE5,
right.
And then so he is a very interesting person that has provided a lot of knowledge to this. And if you go back to my old radio show, you can find 2 interviews that I did with him. I was lucky to have him on, so that was neat. But you have worked with him, and so tell us how. You said you are an experiencer, and so that experience led you to contact him at NASA, and then from there you got pulled into this and you became the executive director. And so how did both you two go about picking people to bring onto your team?
Well, that's a good question. In the first part, I had contacted the PR office at Ames Research Center, and somehow Dr. Haynes ended up responding to that. So that's how I met him, and we went through an investigation. He talked to myself and my fellow witnesses, and in the process, we learned a lot about each other. And I at the time I was working in the financial district in San Francisco, and I understood the basics of getting a startup going, and that was kind of what he needed. So I offered to do it, and so I took on the exo leadership of the organization, and then he started bringing in people. Excuse me. And a lot of them were colleagues. A lot of them were people you would know, people like Dr. McCampbell, Jim McCampbell.
Right.
Very technical researcher, very deeply studied in the field. a lot of his work should be foundational for any serious inquiry into what UAP might be and what their physical properties are. He had a very good perspective on that. We had other folks. Let's see, it was Dr. Bali, Dr. Heish. We had aviation professionals of various kinds, and other ufologists. By the way, Don Ledger took on our Canadian branch. We had a lot of international people. Dominic Weinstein was our an international technical specialist from France, but he's also a member of the College of Experts for the CNES, GPAN, their government UAP research group. And so we ended up with a lot of interaction and overlap with CNES, and eventually signed our first research agreement with the government of Chile fairly early on. So Dr. Haynes
was very impressive. I mean, I was just going to say that was wonderful, and that it's so many people don't realize, that you were pivotal in that, because I think other people have maybe stepped in and kind of taken that, the props from you, and you were there. So I just want to throw that in there.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
I negotiated that whole deal, and it was interesting. I learned a lot. There are issues in terms of managing this subject internationally, and working with a team. For example, we're a science team, right? And we're aviation tech, aviation sciences people, and they're a military team, and they don't function under scientific perspectives per se. They aren't objective like we are by the requirement of our research, and our standards of research are different. These are military officers. They don't feel the need to share data with anybody if they don't have to. They tend to be a little bit blunt about their opinions on things. And so there was a bit of a learning curve in cultural understandings between how they do things and how we do things. And it really was illuminating to me to understand how difficult this subject really is on an international scale. It's a lot harder than you might think it is.
I bet, and I think that's really interesting because, when I look to France or other countries, there seems to be, it's so much more respectable. I don't think you would ever see the kind of stuff that we see here in America take place in other countries, and that's unfortunate. But I guess we like to make money off fake alien bodies. Just kidding. And bad documentaries. Oh, sorry, I've got to stop. Okay, thank you. I'll take a drink now. So you worked with the Chilean government and with France, and so did you find how was France to work with? It sounds like you had some great support.
Well, yeah, we had a cordial relationship, but it wasn't formal, and it was interactive. At the top levels of our group, Dr. Haynes ran our research team, so most of the communications at that level and with them, as far as research went to them directly. But it was interactive and reasonable. We presented to their workshop in 2014, the Kaipan workshop. We talked about case investigative methodology for aviation cases, and we also spoke to the French Air and Space Academy, made a presentation there. So it's not a bad relationship. It just isn't a terribly developed one. It's not official or formal, but it's interactive. We're all dealing with the same thing, and it's kind of better that we maintain independent organizations and everybody sort of stand on their own two legs, and then we present our research and see who's agreeing and who's disagreeing, rather than collaborating on work and not being able to debate the finer points.
And so, let me just ask you, because I think it's important, when people, especially in America, and not to sidetrack you too much, but, we talk a lot about having places that are the world's, most studied paranormal hotspot and UFO hotspot. and yet the data isn't transparent. It's not available for people when, we've been talking about providing that data for a long time. And so how important is that, like what we see Erling Strand and his team in Hessdalen, how important is that to be transparent? And how should this process work?
It's a standard of science to present your raw data along with any paper that you want to submit for peer review. Yeah. If you go to the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences and you look at their journals, that's required. If you're going to present material in a paper, the data that you use to reason that material has to be kept in a public repository for 5 years, where it's available to be looked at, tested, replicated, built upon. And and everywhere you can go to the European Association for Science Editors, right? EASE, they have the same standards. If you go to the journal Nature, journal Science, anywhere else, that's the way it's done. And so, people want to talk about hotspots. I don't recommend Skinwalker because I have no data. There's nothing to recommend anybody to. It's assurances and stories and 30 years of them. But if I turn around and I go to Erling and Hessdalen, Norway, I've got a history of papers that goes back 30 years. I've got automated cameras that are uploading data. I've got transparent researchers who are available to talk. And also nobody's making it proprietary or monetizing it. Knowledge first, logic first.
Right. And I think that's so important. And we just, again, I always stress this because we get so excited with the entertainment aspect. And, we've got, this documentary coming out with this deathbed confession. And, just all of this stuff that you keep seeing. And all of this is recycled. And here comes MJ-12 again. And here comes Serpo. And here comes, Rick Doty and all of this stuff. And it is so distracting and disingenuous. And it's just like, why do we do that? And you and I have talked, privately and on the show before about how we see the same core group of people that are really leading that charge of monetizing and providing a lot of fluff and no real substantial information.
Yes, it's. But what I see is a division occurring here, and it's happening right now. And that those who have their eye on the real situation, the real phenomenon, who are looking for real information, real data, are realizing that there is such things and that more are coming. And so they're going in directions trying to get those answers. If you, on the flip side, you have the other side of the crowd that's more interested in egos or standing in front of the data for any number of reasons. I won't. Probably all the wrong reasons, and a lot of the noobs in that situation, they get pulled in by that kind of circumstance, and but the rest of us who are stayed focused just simply on the phenomenon itself and on the information that's arising from credible sources are in another category. And I think there'll always be people being used and victimized on the one side, but anybody that's applying logic and engaging this rationally is going to go where rational information is being offered, and that's not on that side of the situation. The TV shows, all of that, it's not there. Don't look there yet. They're not doing that yet. So.
Well, and it's, it's an interesting proposition there. And I think, there are good people out there, and there are people like, we mentioned Erling Strand. I love everything that you've done, and people have to go to narcap.org and read the research. Project Sphere is one of my all-time favorites. And so I've got a question from Eve in chat, and thanks for asking or you guys again, really nice conversation as usual. Eve says, hello, Ted, what do you mean by more are coming?
In context of, I think I recall saying that, but I'm not really sure which part what I was talking about.
Well, Eve, sorry, we asked.
I think I was referring to more science and more researchers coming on board that are actually doing science, more scientists.
That's right. And
I
and
think
so
that's
and that, yeah, that's a good answer. Good job, Ted. Thank you. Are UFOs more coming?
yeah,
That's what she meant.
more UFOs coming. Yeah.
So, all right. So you presented at the 1st of August, and you presented with Dr. Kevin Knuth and Ryan Graves, a military pilot. Can you tell us a little bit about that conference and how you were specifically invited and what you presented on?
Well, we were invited to present by the American Institute for Aeronautics and Astronautics. And the purpose of, they set aside a special session in their AV21 conference to advocate for the scientific study of unidentified aerial phenomena. And for those listening that don't know, the AIAA is really the kind of the premier professional organization of aviation sciences people, engineers, technical people, scientists of various types that overlap in the aviation community and the astronautics community are members of that organization. And to give you an idea, on the day we presented on August 6th, there were 41 sessions that day. Our session was almost 4 hours long, so they had 41 sessions, all technical that day. And the whole week was hundreds of sessions, very technical in every way. So it was an opportunity to present to serious-minded, intelligent people who could understand the data being offered and to ask them to follow through with what the director.
So I think Ted is Ted is in Alaska right now, and so he's having a storm that is coming through, and so we might get this intermittent reception. And so I did see Shadowy Spectrums in here asking a question about the French Nimitz case in 1965. So hopefully he will reconnect. But there he is. Hello and welcome back. Ted, can you hear us? There you are. Can you hear us? Hopefully.
I'm here.
Groovy. Okay, continue.
Okay, so
Thank you.
So this is the premier aviation sciences organization in the world, and they opposed the findings of the U.S. Air Force and Project Blue Book and the Condon study in the late 60s, and then they set up a subcommittee of their own to look at UFOs in the early 70s. I think it kind of died on the vine. But as a kid, I was trying to understand why I was having UFO experiences, so I went to the card catalog in my school library. I was probably 14 years old, maybe 1974. Do the math. And the AIAA thing came up, so I went and looked at it, and I thought that, wow, these guys are, this is the real deal. And then here I am 50 years later presenting to them, trying to get them to reopen their studies, to reopen their subcommittee. And it was myself and Kevin Knuth, Dr. Ravi Koparapu, Planetary Sciences from NASA Goddard Spaceflight, and Peter Reale from SCU, and Ryan Graves, and then Philippe Alieris from European Space Agency and UFO Data, Teodorani's group. So we all presented in different aspects of UAP science as we understand it. I presented our preliminary findings with NARCAP after the analysis of our body of cases. We have cases going back to 1916, and about 1,300 of them that I could look at for general trends in shapes, trends in behaviors, trends in incident profiles, flight dynamic pilots. The four most common were balls of light, disks, cylinders, and spheres. And then that's not to say they're the only ones, but the rest are kind of outlier data compared to those. Those are the most common things that people are talking about. And then when you look at disks, spheres, and cylinders, you see no thrust ports, no blast. There's no aerodynamic lifting surfaces. So they're not flying using propulsive thrust and aerodynamic lift. They're certainly not flying ballistically like an arrow or a rock or a flying squirrel. And they're not flying aerostatically, lighter than air, right? They don't seem to be influenced by, let's say how would I put it? They don't experience resistance to changes in velocity or heading. And so they can make angular turns at speed, even acute angle turns at speed with no apparent deceleration. And that's concerning because an airplane, for example, flies with a concert of forces, balancing a concert of forces, right? There's drag, lift, thrust, and gravity, right? And then there's an added factor of air resistance. So when an airplane's flying, if it wants to slow down, it's a gradual process while maintaining a balance between thrust and lift and drag and gravity, right? And then letting the air resistance and everything slow it down. These things just go smack and stop. And when you have these movements where there are thousands of G's are involved, you have an issue of kinetic energy and how that's released. What happens to those photons and when they're thrown off? Why isn't there an impressive explosion? When it goes blam, that's what we would expect. And when they're ripping through the air, why aren't we seeing ionization by impact, the way a meteor ionizes atmospheric molecules when it's blasting through the air? What's happening there is that you have a meteor is moving along, and the atoms right in front of it are moving at its speed, say 40,000 miles an hour, and they're being slammed into atoms that aren't moving at all, and that knocks an electron off, and you get an ionization. So you get this brilliant cloud and this brightness. And I do believe plasma play a role in UAP, and we'll talk about balls of light in a minute, but and other situations where plasma seem to be involved with solids as well. But these are just some of the things you can divine by looking at the data in an aggregate. And as it turned out, I'm sitting right next to people who are looking at specific incidents and finding the same thing through physics, a physical analysis of a specific movement. They're finding the same thing that I'm finding in the analysis of aggregate data in looking for general trends. So my role in all this was to actually present context for UAP and aviation safety to the engineering community.
And it sounded like, because when I spoke to you, a few days after, you were excited about the questions that you started to get. And when you were saying specific things, you felt like, okay, the light's going on, and that a discussion is being, we're moving this discussion forward. And so what were some of the specific things that you felt like, you got in there and that people were making those connections and understanding the gravity of what you were saying?
Well, for example, I talked about balls of light, and of all of our aviation cases that involve reports of concurrent, temporary, or permanent failures of electronic systems, they all involve balls of light. Okay, now I know there's a body of work that has to do with some of these other profiles and like automobiles and this kind of thing, but in the air, it's been balls of light. So 57 cases of it, and all of them involve balls of light. So there's a little chin scratcher there. They're almost never detected on radar. I did a pilot case last year. Air crew were videoing it outside the aircraft and then videoing their airborne radar and showing that they weren't detecting anything. And we have many, many cases where the pilots are looking at it and they ask for confirmation, they don't get it. So intermittent detectability on radar. Well, let's go back and talk about plasmas. You got a plasma and maybe it's absorbing the radar signal. That's what stealth aircraft use them for, and they have plasma actuators on stealth aircraft to help absorb the signal where it might bounce. And so that's another step. And then when you step back a little further and you say, when you look at these balls of light, a lot of them have the same colors as the emission spectra of atmospheric atoms. For example, our orange balls of light, right? That orange atmospheric helium, if you're going to correlate it. And I've actually seen this in action myself. And that was another part, very interesting part of this study, or these interactions that I'm going to share in a minute. But these are the kinds of things when you add these things up, then you go, well, maybe they are plasma forms. And then you look at them, and the common size is about 2 meters. The Omaha took a picture of a sphere that was about 2 meters off of its starboard quarter, and and then I've got a photograph of one sitting underneath an airliner, a series of them of it following him in it's our NARCAP technical report 12. So I had a ball of light following an airliner, pulls right up under the tail of the airliner, and it's about 6 feet in diameter. The pilots are describing this, the one when they're at altitude over Mexico, they got one pacing the airplane, and they're describing it as a teardrop shape with a short tail. Okay, so you have an ion stream being pulled off the back of this thing, if it's plasma, right? More argument for why these are plasma forms. Then the question becomes, how do they maintain the reaction? Because it's not by impact. It's pacing an airliner that's doing 500 miles an hour, and it's certainly not ionizing, So there's, again, we're using logic and rationale, and we're looking at the data, and we're making the first cuts. You throw it all at the wall, you see what sticks. You make the first cuts, it gives you some general ideas where you can have a basic parameter, conduct a search, or to take on an experiment, make a test. And that's when science starts. So what we were doing at the AIAA was to bring this initial information out and stimulate the nerds to get them to start working on this. And they are.
Wonderful. And I've got another great question from Marcin. Do you correlate sightings with other data, historical events, whether astronomical events?
Try to. For example, this case I was sharing with you about the pilots filming the UAP outside the window. There was an argument that could be Venus, right? That the pilots were actually tracking Venus. But my obligation as a researcher is to look at the gestalt of it all, the whole case, the whole picture, and say, okay, well, how did they describe the incident? What did they see happen in the beginning? What was it that initiated this observation? Well, in their case, it came from above, flared up brightly, and then paced their aircraft. So in the first part. The second part, they were northbound in clear air with a lot of clouds to the west. Venus was making a transit and dropping into the western horizon. And you can see on their airborne radar, there's a bank of clouds. So if they were going to perceive Venus as pacing their aircraft close by, it wouldn't be seen through the bank of clouds, right? And so they're flying, they can see this thing for hours falling to the left and setting, right? So you have to, it's very important to look at all of the information. And to be open about it, it could well be Venus. I don't know the answers to that. But this brings me to a larger point, and that is, why are we collecting these cases to begin with? And why are people who are not necessarily, why are citizen researchers doing this? We make a lot of mistakes. We do. A lot of the cases that we grab, they don't work out, they don't pan out. Right. Never mind the grifters, and put them over in their own little corner. But sincere-minded researchers are looking at things, and they're making mistakes. And I've had to learn this too. I was not a research expert or even a logician. I wasn't an expert at logic or critical thinking even when I started all of this. I was an experiencer who had the living crap scared out of him by this stuff for most of my life. And I really needed, to feel like I was doing something. I had terrible anxiety. I had, trauma, couldn't sleep, couldn't function, couldn't keep a job, lost my girlfriend, lost everything. Eventually, I hit hard. I spent probably 5 or 6 years homeless, running NARCAP through a laptop under a tree. And yet I stayed with the work, and I stayed focused on the circumstance because I'd been scarred by it. And I felt like a lot of other people deserved my best in that area. And I had access to the best, so I did what I could with it.
Well, and thank you. And I want to ask you a question, because to me, this has been something that has been really bothering me lately, and I know that I've, talked to other people, Barry Greenwood, and things about abduction research, and the fact that you have a lot of abduction, experts or experiencer teams that are interviewing witnesses and collecting all this personal data, but they're not trained in anything.
That's right.
And they're also not only that, but they are imposing their belief systems on people who have had potentially a very traumatic experience, which is wrong on so many levels. And then you get this type of, oh yes, we're going to invite you into this group hypnosis session, and yes, you are channeling the benevolent beings of light from, yada yada yada, all of this stuff, and it really is so dangerous and leads to a lot of cult-like behavior in some of these people. And I mean, what do what is your take on that, and how do we start to pull that away from people that really shouldn't be operating in that space?
Well, the first thing I would tell any experiencer that's having trouble with their experiences is to find a licensed professional that's legally and ethically responsible for the things they say and do. Don't let just anybody into your head. Trauma, PTSD, rarely is just one thing. You may remember the most scary thing that you ever experienced, but chances are the reason you have trauma is because it's linked to things that you don't remember from before that. And I'm not saying, for example, I didn't have a particularly nice upbringing. I like a lot of people. And there were a lot of times in my youth that I didn't feel safe. I felt in danger, at home around the adults in my life. And so that complexes with having one of these things move up on you. All right. So now you've got traumas that are intertwined, right? It's the same feeling, right? Nobody can help you, right? And you're isolated and vulnerable, and in a way that there's nothing you can do about it. And nobody likes to admit they're a victim. So that's why it takes a lot of work to actually confront these things and heal yourself. But it's really, really important that you get that even if you're licensed clinical therapist that's morally and ethically and legally responsible for what they're doing, is focusing on other events in your life, that doesn't take away from why it doesn't detract from your experience with UAP. But the point is that you got to go deeper to understand it. Trauma work is it's really important, and it's very honest work. It's something that you have to learn insight and awareness. You have to know when you're cycling, when you're in anxiety, and be psychologically sensitive to it so that you can observe it and understand where it's coming from, and then have insight and go down into yourself and engage at that level where the trauma is. Perhaps you were 12. You tell that little 12-year-old what they needed to hear. The adults failed you. This is not your fault. Okay? And soldier on, little man, and tell him what he needs, to come back to life, And I had to go through that a lot because I had a lot more than UFOs in my background. And I got a hunch that people who have these problems, they're a type. They've got the trauma to begin with, and then they get a UFO experience and it just breaks them. It sure demolished me, I'll tell you.
Well, and I think that is important, that most people, and I think, Dr. Haynes brings up a great point in observing UFOs, that perhaps this should be more of the behavioral sciences that is addressing this, instead of, because it's very difficult to collect, data, other than, the personal experiences, you don't get
right.
a lot of you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Because clearly, I can't form two words together. This is great. Oh, I'm telling you. Some days I don't know what I am, but anyway, that's okay.
Well, it's anecdotal, right? We're working with people's stories, and the plural of anecdote is crickets. The plural of anecdote is data.
Right.
Okay. We don't know what it means, all right, but a lot of people are saying it. So we go try and find out. that's just the core phenomenology. You don't have to believe in what they're saying, but the point is not to disbelieve it and to go find out. And why are they saying that? Why are they all describing these incidents and events? What's going on here? And it's a multidisciplinary examination. There are psychologists who are firmly in the corner of experiencers. There are others who are absolutely not. And there are academics with tenure and issues to worry about. I mean, remember when John Mack was doing this work, how Harvard censored him, and it was Danny Sheehan and what's his name, Alan Dershowitz, that defended him to the Harvard censor board, and managed to keep his tenure. And the Harvard board said it was an unfortunate interest. Okay, and all he's doing is science. He's following where the information is taking him, and he's trying to learn more.
And I just want to throw in there that John Mack, I mean, he was wasn't he receiving a little bit of funding from Bigelow?
I don't know the answer to that. Might have been. I do know that Bigelow's probably not a good business partner, and I'm not sure that he's particularly moved by the human side of this, other than what he can glean out of it for his own information. I don't think he's terribly concerned about other people.
Danny Sheen is an interesting choice, and I want to just throw this in there because I noticed that they've been having a lot of conferences as of late, and that's, Sheen is representing Elizondo, which I find quite interesting, and I have to say that, when we're talking about kind of moving in that cult type mentality, that's kind of going there for me. Just throwing that in there. But, and so, with... And so with the abduction research, I mean, was there, you've got John Mack, some people love him, and some people, there was a person, Charles, in the chat that was saying he wasn't all he was cracked up to be. And so I think it's just such it's an interesting field. And as we have seen, and there's been some, again, that controversy that is getting stirred up about Dr. David Jacobs and the panty story and things like that. So there's some, that's a good one. I just thought I'd throw that in, but there's some questionable things that are coming out.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to just tell you that Jesse Peak is saying, you're a great guest, Ted, and you're a pioneer in the field. And also other people are just expressing their their gratitude for you expressing, your personal experiences and things and the trauma that you endured, because it's insightful for people.
That's the point. And let me mention that I actually made it a point in my presentation to the AIAA to make it clear that I'd seen them. And part of getting the stigma off of this thing is the understanding that having seen them should not detract from your credibility as a researcher. To have actual experience with what you're studying shouldn't take away from your credibility, as long as your information is presented clearly and properly and open to challenge. My experiences, most of them I have not been able to document, but I've had them, and they've informed my research and some of my work, like this ball of light work, for example, that I was sharing with you earlier. And to that extent, I'm not going to deny that, and I'll tone it down, and I think they would like me to. But the issue is that they're not ready yet. They're noobs. I remember when I first got into this research and people started talking to me about hotspots, I wasn't going to go there. That was just too far down the road for me to manage. And that's coming from somebody who's been 20 feet from one, from UAP. And it was just not something I was ready to digest. And I think a lot of the scientists that are coming on board need this to come to them in bite-sized pieces, so that they can work it through and that they can get their personal philosophies and notice their biases and use their awareness and insight and ground themselves so that they can deal with this data dispassionately and then really tell us what's going on,
And that's
and I think
hard.
they can.
And and I mean, Ted, you and I have this conversation quite frequently because we have both had interesting experiences. Mine have not been like yours; they haven't been traumatic, but it is hard, and that is essential as somebody who's researching this to put away your bias. And that's another thing I see in the UFO community. Nobody seems to do that. And that's really critical. And how do you, when you have had a traumatic event, how do you put away your bias?
Well, that's a great question. And the first thing is work with your trauma. I couldn't be even partially objective right now if I hadn't done the personal work. Secondly, I was mentored. I was around people who were scientists and who helped set the tone. Images I was responsible for. So that toned me down considerably and kept me from making mistakes for a while, saying things that I shouldn't say, not checking the room, before you talk, because people can only handle so much. And there's more to this than people want to handle. Some people can't handle this at all. And it's understandable. It's understandable. There's fear involved here, and rightly so. So, as an experiencer, you've got to move past that level of where you're just engaging it constantly. And the only way to do that is personal work. You have to train your awareness, train your insight, get some help, do some EMDR or some other things that might be of some assistance, and then move in a way that changes your relationship to yourself and reality. You have to ground yourself stronger, not covet your life so that you're not in fear all the time.
You work hard at that. You work hard at that. I know you do.
I do. So, when I lost everything in 2008, I like a lot of people did. I wasn't underwater. I didn't lose. Well, I was underwater, but but I didn't lose. I wasn't in the red. But I was on the beaches in Hawaii teaching freediving to a sparse population, spending a lot of time swimming. But at that point, I decided to re-engage my martial arts training and looking carefully at meditation and meditative practices. And I honed in on training awareness, which is kind of the foundation of the Buddhist practice, and found the right teachings for that and engaged. And I spent about 6 years living outdoors, just meditating, practicing sword, and moving forward. I ended up having a lot of sword students and a lot of freediving students and some meditation students, and I kept working with myself, working on my insight and awareness, understanding the roots of my emotions and what caused them to come up and why. And as you know, we were when you and I first met, we were almost immediately in a pretty negative environment. And I think I called you after you published your Nephi case, mm-hmm. your Nephi, Utah case, and wanted to congratulate you on that work. I thought it was good work. And then we struck off a friendship, but we ended up going.
Oh, you froze for a moment. Okay. So there you go. Okay, there you're back.
Okay, yeah. We went through some real roller coaster stuff dealing with the ufology community, and that was where I got my insight on why the subject is blocked up the way it is. And then I just turned my back on it pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's so hard, and it's one of the things that really upsets me is the fact that you can, you have this, you have an experience, you're curious about something, and then you turn to the UFO community, and then you get used and abused and filled full of garbage, and then in some cases when you're really trying to push forward, you get bullied, and you get, special little names like Empress of the Dark Cabal, and I like Demon of Seductress of the Ufology. That's a good one, but but it's like it's crazy, and Scott has, we've all experienced that kind of online bullying and harassment from people, and it's really it's pretty sad. So
it can be quite vicious. I've had death threats. I've had all kinds of things, and I'm a pretty middle of the road guy. but I say it like it is, and from my perspective, and I think that's my duty to this study in the field and to everybody involved to be honest and candid and transparent and to represent those of us who got less than happy experiences with this subject, as well as those who are in awe of how it's happening. I'm a little more concerned about why people like me have these experiences and so on. But taking it back to working with science and moving the ball forward, what we need to do is to continue to encourage them in small steps to look a little more closely. I sent out some papers that I'm aware of, papers by Teodoranyi and others about the Hesselman situation and the work of Erling Strand, and that percolated very well. I spoke with Avi Loeb a couple of days ago and asked him if he was aware of Dr. Teodoranyi and Professor Strand, and kind of got a commitment out of him to look a little more closely at all of this, because there are clusters where UAP phenomena occur, and I think if you're going to dedicate resources, you might want to go where they're most likely to be observed. Simple logic, And
Absolutely.
but these are noobs. These are noobs. They don't know these things, and you got to find a way to tell it to them without overwhelming them.
Well, and you know what? And I want to say that I do, I've just unidentified celebrity review. Luis is here, and he is kind of spearheaded the phone home disclosure thing that we're doing, and I think that's next weekend, which I'm really excited about. And that is, I really respect him and I like him. He's funny. He just makes me laugh. But it's fun that
He's got
you can.
I'll give him that.
He does. I love it,
very
and I
intelligent,
think
yeah.
it's fun that that there's a new crowd of people, younger generation getting into this, and then you have people that we all should be willing to learn. And and I love that. So this is going to be a really fun event. So I just wanted to just say, yeah. Baby, I'm excited about that.
Well,
that's the way it should
thanks
be.
for bringing that up. I saw something about that, some weeks ago, but I've really been kind of immersed in all of this.
I'm sure, yeah.
And I'd love to even be involved with some of these things. I think that I have a duty to represent the experiencer side of this along with the science side and carry the whole thing right into their court. And that's been my take on it all. Just, there are people who are listening to this right now and who are going to listen to this that have been closer than a lot of us have been to these phenomena, and they deserve to be listened to and respected. And if they need help, they should get it. We have whole populations that are underserved here. I have pilots and air controllers because the FAA literally rejects their reports. And imagine what it was like when the UAP task force turned around and said, hey FAA, why don't you share all that pilot data and stuff you guys got on the UAP over there, all those cases that you just kind of squirreled away there, and the FAA says, what cases? Because you go to the manual and they're literally rejecting the data. They're telling the pilots to take it somewhere else. And, that must have been an uncomfortable moment in the room there. and I would anticipate that, if we're looking for real change, start looking to see that manual change and the FAA change its stance on pilot reports. When that happens, I'll close the doors of NARCAP, because that's kind of our purpose for being, is collecting those cases. And I'll continue working in the field, helping educate and inform. And if I can, I'd like to do field research. If anybody's out there that needs a field researcher, I've looked the phenomenon in the eye. I'm happy to do it.
Well, I just wish we need to get some funding. We need to go out again, because we went to that wonderful site for a few days, and we need more equipment. We need funding. So,
as you know, there's data to be had there, and my last time there was, I'm still not the last time, but one of the prior times. I'm still processing that one. So, there are places where you can get right close to these things and find yourself confronted with more reality than you're really ready to take on. I've been reading up on tonic immobility. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with this at all? This is when you freeze, no fight, no flight, you just freeze, right? This is what happens to antelopes when the lion gets them. Most of the time they're alive. When they're munching on them, just, They're tonic immobility. They don't move. And it's, and I think with some of us who have had a lot of trauma, when that moment comes, we sort of freeze. We just stop. And I've had that happen to me. When reality starts bending in ways that I can't keep up with it, I just stop. And I'm not that way anymore. You can train yourself out of that. And I would tell all of your listeners that you can. It's absolutely necessary if you're going to do research up close.
Right. And, I've talked to Dr. Teodoranti about that before, so I don't know. It is interesting. And it's when you're, he's like, I'm there, I'm a scientist, I'm collecting information. And so it's like,
I'm ice cold.
Put on that, that hat. That's so, and some people can do that.
I'm
like
ice cold,
you've
and I
had
walk
that
right
trauma.
at it,
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. He's got the right attitude, but the point is that it's more than being an observer who's collecting data in a dispassionate way. You're dealing with something that is just on the edges of what humans are really capable of grasping at the moment.
Right. And so
we can get it, but.
And I want to just, say that again, that there are some great questions in here and I will try to get to all of them. But Eve Clancy wants to know if you could describe one of your encounters.
Okay, well, I'll use the one that I used at the AIAA conference to illustrate the idea that perhaps emission spectra of UAP are similar or are actually atmospheric atoms. I was at a bay in Hawaii that's well known, and I'd been told by my friend who was the priestess who kept that bay. She kept the great temple in that bay. There's 3 of them in there that go back, and the women in her family have kept this temple since the 1820s. And her name was Haleaka Iolani Puli. And Aka found out that I was a UFO guy, and she came to me one day and she says, "Brother, the UFOs, they come from the water right over there, and they come in and they hover over the poly and they collect the mana. So they'll collect the mana, right? And then they go up the mountain and disappear in the Keopuka by choice mark." And I thought, wow, that's just really wonderful, And I just tucked that in the back of my head, and because in Hawaii it's like Sedona. You're in this place where there's a lot of uncritical people. Probably more witches per square inch than anywhere but Sedona, in terms of, so many women in midlife who've decided to become shaman, this kind of thing. And so I just kind of tucked that away. She's a priestess.
What are you trying to say?
Nothing. I'm not trying to say nothing.
Are you telling me that I should become a shaman?
It's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
But no, so I'd heard this story from others, and I'd heard about lights under the water, and I'd heard other stories related to this area. And witnesses included locals, local native people, as well as others. I went through an initiation with Aka, and it put me kind of on the inside with the village there at Manini and Napoopoo. And so I had sort of an inside with it all. I'm probably one of the only white people allowed on the temple there. I never go on that temple. It's human sacrifice, big time. So anyway, one day, about 2:11 in the morning, I left my phone in the car, walked out on the beach, was standing near the temple, looking out to sea, and I see an orange ball of light come out of the water. Out at the very edge of the horizon. It was a glassy night. There was no ripples. The water was like glass. It was right at the bottom of the tide, and everything was just settled. Moonlight, clear night, Hawaii, 79 degrees, just wonderful. And then I'm sitting there looking out, and I see this thing come out of the water, and then it proceeds to come towards me. And it's this orange ball. And as it comes closer, it's a perfect ball. It's a sphere. And it's orange, and as it gets a little closer, I can see there's something in the interior of it, and it's a saucer. And the sphere goes right around the edges of this thing all the way, and I can see the underside of this thing as it's coming. There's a sort of a band inside the lip of it on the rim, and then it had 3 rounded protrusions organized around a center point on the thing. It looked like ceramic, It was white, and then this orange sort of glow around it as it came up to the beach, and there were a couple of guys fishing for bonefish to my left, some Hawaiian fellows, and I said, "Hey," and I pointed up, and they all looked up, and then there's a long tradition of not looking at things you shouldn't in Hawaiian culture. They all had their chins on the ground. And I watched this thing, and it crossed the beach, and then it just flared up into a blob of white yellow light, just assuming a plasma. I don't know. And then the whole mess just kind of moved up the ravine and towards Keopuka Heights, Choice Mart. So so this is apparently a recurrent thing. I'd had it described to me before I saw it. I was just in the right place at the right time. I wasn't looking for it, and it's just a story. Okay, it doesn't mean anything in the long end of it all, other than perhaps there's a place we should set up some cameras and pay attention. That's my take on it all. Is more data is needed. Let's go get more data. I know a place we can go get some data. If you're at all serious about this. And this is a story I used with the AIAA to illustrate why I thought the emission spectrum was helium. It was because of the orange in the globe. So there's a story for your
Okay,
folks
thank
there.
you, thank you. I appreciate that. That's awesome. Yeah, and Matthew, we definitely need to chat. Becky, thanks for being here and your support of the show. And so I just wanted to clarify, because we had a question earlier, were you ever involved in the military, or did you work for the government?
Oh, no, I never did. Dr. Haynes had a clearance. So did all of those guys, Heish and Bully and the rest of the crew. But I was an administrator, an executive, and I served. I was in the Coast Guard when I was way young, but a few years younger than I am now. Let's just put it that way. And but no, I have no relationship to the government at all whatsoever. And my whole take on all of this is that I will do what I do until somebody tells me to stop it. And out of respect for my government as a former serviceman, my government came to me and asked me to cut it out. I cut it out. So.
Okay. Scott, do you have any questions? I know that you're not feeling good and everything. And is there anything you want to ask Ted? Because you finally got him here. You get to see him and meet him for the first time.
I actually have a couple questions from Peter Shelley that he posted today on Facebook. He asked me to ask Ted. So questions for Ted tonight. Regarding his own sighting UFO event in Northern California, has he found any clues as to what it actually was?
Hey, Scott, I didn't really get any of that. It broke up in the transmission.
Oh, okay. He says, regarding your sighting that you had in Northern California, have you found any clues as to what it actually was?
Oh, me? My sighting? Okay, yeah. I had an incident in Oakland, California, so that's Northern California, technically, yeah. And it was what it was. It was exactly what it looked like, if that's any help. There wasn't anything to learn about it. It either happened or it didn't. It was 15 feet from my car. So, and I could clearly see the device and its interior and its occupants and their activities and the whole 9 yards. Okay, so I either saw it or, it either happened or it didn't, and it happened. So I live with that story, It's part of the uncomfortable side of all this that involves other stories that aren't so nice.
Right.
That's why I tend to speak out for experiencers, is because a lot of us are not particularly enamored with what we've been through.
Absolutely. And I know that Peter had a couple other questions. Scott, do you want to go back and ask them?
Yeah. The second one was a follow-up to that question, which was, is it possible it may have been something from the wizards of Silicon Valley or another world?
Wow. Yeah, you trailed off there at the end, Scott, but I think I got the gist of it. No, I don't think so. I watched it move. It did jump from about a mile away straight to the windshield of our car, and it did it faster than my eye could blink. It was visible cross section. I could see the occupants, and they didn't even rock on their heels. So we're talking about tech that negates inertia, and I don't really think that we've got anything that does that.
Right.
And again, this is my personal experience. Okay, these are not validated things. I'm not telling the world that this. These experiences are why I'm here. I wouldn't be involved if I hadn't been exposed to these things, and I share them in the spirit of the technical understanding that we can get from them as a starting point. For research, not as anything. It doesn't. There's no meaning to this, and there's no money to it. Right? It's just I'm just telling you what I've seen.
Right.
Yeah, and and I appreciate that, Ted. I mean, it takes a lot to come forward and things, and I really appreciate that because obviously you have that line where you've got the scientific community that you're trying to engage, and you can't do that, but then you've got your own personal experiences, which is why you're here to begin with. And so I think that's a very fine line to try to walk. So I appreciate you trying to give us information and be candid about your sightings and your personal experiences. So, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the abductions, and then Scott, we'll get back to you because I know that Peter had another question, and I apologize for cutting you off. But do you find that looking at people that are having experiences like yours, that most of them have traumatic?
Erica, I'm not getting you.
Okay.
I'm not hearing you.
Well, blame it on
okay,
Alaskan weather. Alaskan weather. So do you?
We got rainstorms coming through.
Oh, but that's beautiful.
Go ahead.
So if you have, you have people that are having experiences like yours, do you find that most people have had those traumatic events, and how do you differentiate, as Dr. Haynes said in observing UFOs, you have the hoax objects, you have the perception issues based on misinterpretation, and then you've got psychological factors. And so how do you begin to differentiate between those?
Well, we have the same problem with our pilot witnesses, right? How do we differentiate between the illusions and delusions that pilots have that they're susceptible to, and the misidentifications of natural phenomena and human activity that they're also susceptible to, and how do we find that core information in there about unidentifieds? It's the same problem. And we have to understand where we are in the study. This is all foundational. We're developing preliminary data so we can understand where to begin. And it begins with what people tell us, and then we test it. And then what we find allows us to move forward. If we have F-18 pilots that are telling us that they're collecting data on UAP with their fighters, then somebody can go look at that data and work on it, and it all interconnects. What a pilot sees is what a ground observer sees is what an abductee reports. So all of these things they come together, and they what they are is a call for vigilance. Science needs to take step at a time, just understand it, get clear that it's there, get clear that it has parameters that can be observed under, and then start watching it and collecting more data. And it could take years, probably take years, to get anything that would formulate a hypothesis as to what it is and why it's here. But there is a what and there is a why. And that's one thing all of us who put time in all of this kind of understand, those of us who've been exposed to it. Hoaxes are an issue, and we know that people have issues with memory and testimony and so on. But again, these cases aren't proof. None of these cases are proof. These cases are a call for vigilance. Our cases are a call for vigilance. We're saying, look, these things are happening, and we want you to look more. get over the stigma and start looking more, because we're an underserved population. We're exposed to this. We're trying to cope, and whether we're pilots and we're exposed to it, or whether just Joe Schmoes like me that are exposed to it, it's time to take it on and do something about it. So that's what our cases are really for. There aren't any cases out there that are absolute proof, although there's some darn good ones that certainly inform in the directions that a lot of us understand. But if you want the mainstream to catch up, you got to give them time, and you got to work with them, and they're trying. It's been 70 years of being high-centered by the very people we considered leaders in the field. So here we are, and there's movement now, and I'm part of trying to inform that movement. All of the work that I offer and all the ideas I have, most of them are not just mine. I'm carrying the data of people behind me that have generation researchers really that have looked at this. And it's just my turn to help kind of put a shoulder to the wheel and help it move. And it seems to be. They're using our term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. Dr. Haynes defined that in 1980, and we used it in our first paper in 1999 with the definition. And there is a definition to UAP, and a UAP is something that you designate it that once your investigation is finished, not when it starts.
Sorry, go ahead, Ted.
Well, I was just going to say, and then aviation safety was the other side of it, and that's been our sole focus, or cases that involve aviation safety, because they have the most data, and they tell us, they inform on flight dynamics and all kinds of other things. So, and there are good reasons to be involved, because there are souls on board, and safety is a factor. It's important. So it lends relevance to the study to begin with, and we pushed that from 20 years ago.
So let me ask you, here's another question here. Is the data large enough to form future projections?
Please ask that one more time.
Is the data large enough to form future projections?
In some cases it is. It at least informs to the point of testability. I posited that ball of light UAP are ionizing, and they're emitting plasma, right? So we can test that, and I offered a number of reasons for why it might be plasma, and so that'll inform the inquiry to look, are these plasmas, and how does that affect radar detection, and how does that affect the other things that go along with it? There was a lot of the conversation at the AIAA and the after session was about how to come up with detection schema to protect aircraft from these things, keep from getting too close to them. As it turned out, because the F-18s were finding out that these things were a lot denser than they thought they were, that there were more of them out there. And so there's adaptations going on at a number of levels. And the best thing we can do right now is just help our fellow humans adapt, without being too goofy about it.
And so let me ask you, because, again, this is a conversation you and I have several times a week, but how do we know that this isn't advanced technology? How do we know, because there's some people who I've been, looking at Martin Cannon, and he started to come to the conclusion that a lot of this type of thing that was taking place was some type of continuation of MK Ultra. And, perhaps some of the technologies that we're seeing are actually ours. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my focus is on right now and getting data right now, understanding the phenomena right now. I understand that there are histories, narratives that go back, everything from Roswell to every kind of conspiracy. And I say that more in the CIA term of conspiracy theory rather than the common use of the term. But just that my concern is what I saw, and what I saw, I'm as certain as I'm sitting here, was real, and I saw the crew, and they were real also, and they were not human beings. And so, in my own sense of presence in all of this. I'm informed by my own experience. To say that they couldn't be in my lab or all of that, I don't know. But I have yet to see anybody make a solid sphere fly. Heavier than air, solid round sphere fly. And these things do it no problem at all. There's a lot about all of this, the actual physical manifestations of these things that just don't fit modern tech or the tech research arc, And then the last thing I'll point out is that, my case files go back to 1916. I have 100 years pilot cases reporting the things that we're seeing today. The first one in 1916, the guy called them flying manhole covers. Okay, but he was talking about disc forms. 1924 had big cylinders over Nevada, and so on. So, what's been reported has been reported all along, and it predates powered flight pretty clearly.
So could this be some sort of misperception, misinterpretation?
No, because of the trends in the data, the trends in the report over decades, the same in the past as they are coming all the way up from different unrelated people and different unrelated environments from around the world. These UAP profiles are observed everywhere, not just in America. And that's why we worked with the French and the others. And one of our studies on our site is actually a catalog of 1,300 pilot reports, and they come from around the world. They're from everywhere, over the oceans, over Antarctica, over the poles, over every region that the ICAO has dominion over, all 7 ICAO regions. So, and it goes back 100 years. And that's been part of our problem, is that aviation system was willing to talk about balls of light, but these objects, these troublesome objects, they really don't want to go there. They've been there for a long time. And they haven't wanted to take that on.
And so I want to ask you about some of the things that Ryan Graves has encountered. And I mean, he was mentioning that these objects were seen off the East Coast. He's the fighter pilot. I mean, couldn't some of what he is witnessing, couldn't that be adversarial technology?
No. I think if you read the wording of the DNI, that's a threat posture. And yeah, I want to eliminate the idea that any of our adversaries are expressing that kind of technology. They want to eliminate that, be sure. But I don't think they'd be down this road if they weren't already fairly sure. And that's why they're lifting the stigma and saying, look into these things, study these things, report these things, centralize the reporting, make it available to the intelligence committees, and the Joint Chiefs and so on, and let's look at this and understand it. And if there's nothing to it, that'll come out in the wash. There's something to it, and we pay our military well to protect us. I don't worry too much about what they have to say about it. I thought the DNI paper was fairly enlightened, given the subject and how tentative they've been in dealing with it for all these years. I thought that was a really good first step, and they did it without getting too much on them. So, we'll see if something comes of that. And I do think it is. That's why I'm presenting to the AIAA, is just because of those findings. And I would imagine that more is going to come of that over time.
And that's great, and like I said, I'm very happy for you that you had this great group of people, that you were working with, and that you can talk to some of these people and move things forward in a new way, and I just think that's really cool. And so where can people go to hear your lecture and Dr. Kevin Knuth and Ryan Graves and the other people that you mentioned that were presenting?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
So I know we kind of break it up. So where can people go to hear the presentations from Ryan Graves, from you, from Kevin, Dr. Kevin Knuth?
Well, the organizers for the conference asked me to post it on the NARCAP YouTube channel.
Okay.
So you can go to NARCAP YouTube, and I have them all there in a playlist. There, I have the full 3-hour session, and I have each of the individual presentations in 25 to 30 minute blocks.
That's great.
There's 7 of those, and then our then our recommendations also jointly compiled recommendations for the aviation sciences community and the policymakers on what ought to be done. And we presented that. That's about 8.5 minutes at the end of the presentation.
Wonderful. That's really, really cool. I love it. I love it. So, and I did watch it, and it was good. You did a great job. So,
Thank you.
so where, I mean, I know, I'm sure you were nervous. I can't even imagine.
Oh my God. Yeah, probably the most important talk I've ever given in my life, you know, and to an audience that I am not one of. I am not an engineer. They're a strange bunch anyway. God bless you, engineers.
I've always gravitated towards engineers. It's very strange, but they are they are different. You know, we love them. We need them.
Oh, well, yeah, I have them in my family, and they're a unique kind of being. And a lot of what we're enjoying in our future with SpaceX and everything else is a direct result of people like that. And we're going to turn those guys loose on the UFO subject, and I think we're going to get some answers. You know, we're going to learn some things, and I'm pretty excited about it myself. Although it's in its infancy, this is a new moment. This is probably the best moment for ufology in terms of research since the 50s.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, because obviously, you know, we had in fact, I think, you know, it was funny. You and I were presenting at UFO Congress. This is back in 2017, I believe. And,
17.
you know, that was, so just a lot of stuff was starting to heat up. And, you know, we found out that Tom DeLonge had won Researcher of the Year. And it was like,
Yeah, I spewed my drink all over the floor. I just, God, you know. I
remember seeing.
I was tearing my hair out and dancing around the place. I wanted to.
Well, I think that there was like just a gasp, you know, in the audience, especially from some of the people, you know, that actually I really respect and things, because it was just like there's so many incredible researchers that are putting forward work, and so, but you know, regardless of, you know, that and you know, all of that, that was a moment that pushed this subject out into the spotlight. I mean, not that particular moment, but the New York Times article and the subsequent press that pushed things out there and gave us the ability for people that we would not necessarily have conversations about this subject with. It gave us that ability to be taken a little bit more seriously. And so that was a great moment, you know, I mean, for all of us. But now my concern, and I want to ask you this, is some of the things that are taking place. Are we going to take, you know, 100 steps forward and then take 200 back? Because, you know, the kind of the Stephen Greer type stuff is coming up again.
Yeah. Well, you know, what I've seen is a split in the field, and these guys, Greer and this bunch, are kind of going in one direction with their convergence conferences and all the other stuff that they like to talk about, and then those who are actually doing the work are going in another direction, and those who are following work are following them. And so I think what you're going to see is just a continued parting of the ways between critical thinkers and everybody else who's being exploited.
Right.
And I personally, I've got no interest in that. I don't really even want to badmouth these guys. We all know who they are, and we all know what they've done and what they haven't done. And I think that an awful lot of what's wrong with ufology is right there in their corner. They've obstructed and created an environment that was untenable for so long, and some of it you have to wonder if it was engineered, you know, if it was on purpose or not, because it's just been so bizarre. And you know, when you have when science and your academics have an irrational relationship to factual information, that's an artificial environment. Something created that, you know, because they're not that way with everything else. You know, in fact, it's their standard, you know, of how open they are and how, you know, level thinking they are to engage everything as for what it is. And yet in that one subject is verboten. You can't talk about it. You know, you can lose your tenure, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's an artificial situation, and I'm not sure exactly how it came by. I think it started probably with Robertson panel and some understandings in the government about UAP back in the very early 50s. Probably had to do with perhaps that big military exercise that we had in 1952 in the summer of 52. Might have, because Robertson came along in 53 and then everything changed. So, yeah, I don't know really where the future is in all of this, but I think we just need to be level-eyed and honest and careful and understate a little bit. Let people catch up. They don't need to see the bottom of the rabbit hole. You know, they just need to know it's there, not fall into it, and then do their work and let the work lead them. The data will lead them. Those of us who need them to understand things, rest assured they'll understand it. These are not fools. And keep in mind that probably some of these engineers that I'm working with have seen the darn things. Odds are, you know. So, you know, it's have some patience for the growth, I guess, and have some faith that people are going to outgrow. Freudian slip there. People are going to outgrow the grifters.
I'm using that one, man. That's a good one.
Yeah, oops, I don't know where that came
New
from.
material.
No idea about that. But yeah, you keep your eye on the ball. That's what I would tell anybody that's actually interested in this, and ignore ufology. Ignore the heroes on the podium that spent years and years telling us the same thing and nothing forever, and start focusing on the new voices and the new research, the people that are publishing papers, people that are offering findings, the people that are trying to move the real inquiry forward. Look carefully at the real phenomenon, not the one you imagined, you know, not the Jetsons episodes, you know, look at the real thing and stay focused on that. Keep your speculation in check, keep your extrapolations reasonable and short, you know, and let the data develop, you know, one step at a time.
And so how would you, you know, I mean, having had personal experiences that are traumatic, what would be the best advice for people in your position? Because I know you have a role where you feel like you want to be an advocate. You are an advocate, and you want to push things forward and really engage people in the scientific community. But what would you tell people that have had, you know, these traumatic experiences? I know that you mentioned that it's important to seek a therapist, a good therapist, preferably one that you don't find at a UFO conference. But I mean, would you encourage people to avoid, you know, ufology altogether?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're already having a problem with these things, you know, think of another trauma. Just imagine, okay, maybe you're traumatized by crocodiles when you were 15 or something, right? So are you going to go and sit on the bank with the crocodiles? You know, is that really the right thing to do? And if you've been traumatized by the UFOs and UAP, is it the right thing to do to jump feet first into ufology? Take it from me, no, it's not. I was an experiencer. I was very messed up. And within months of that, I was running a premier research team. And I had no business being there. I needed help. And I decayed and I broke down. And I decayed and I broke down. And over 12 to 14 years of being exposed to this stuff, I got sicker and sicker. And the heroes around me didn't notice. They didn't care. They were working on their own images and their own. There was no help there. There was no. I would talk to Dr. Haynes about my experiences, and he'd just shrug. Same thing with Dr. Valee, you know.
Well, and that's what I found so interesting, and you know, something that has kind of bothered me is that you were surrounded by some of these people, you know, that have been, you know, like I remember you talking about on the last show that we did, how you had this experience in a bar in San Francisco.
Erica, it's breaking up again.
Okay. Yeah,
there you go. Now go ahead. I got you.
Okay, so I remember, you know, when, you know, you had told me, and this is something that kind of just kind of concerned me a little bit, because of the people that are running in this field that just play games with people. But you had mentioned an experience you had in a bar when you were presenting in San Francisco. And I just thought that was so fascinating to me, because here you have people that are coming in. I mean, wasn't Jack Sarfati there?
I'm barely getting you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want me to illuminate that a little bit? Is that
Yeah,
what you're?
yeah, I would, because I just
Um,
think it's fascinating. If
yeah.
you don't mind, and I'm sorry. I just think that it's yeah, it's that's. I think
Well,
people need to
I
hear
tell
that.
your listeners that there are a lot of uh, parties that are interested in UAP and UFO information. I there are state actors. I have 140 countries a week in my website. The Chinese are all over it all the time. Anytime I put something new in, I get huge bursts of information or hits and traffic from seats of government and this kind of thing, places where power is concentrated in the world. And so you have the state actors that are looking at this. You have the private actors with their own research foundations that are looking at this. You have the security firms that are compiling data into products and selling it to clients. Um, then you have the grifters and liars and the cheaters and all the rest of them that are working this field as well. So you want to be really careful about the kind of relationships you have and who you talk to in your email and this kind of thing. And that having been said, I was contacted by a woman and was social. She was in England, but she was she was a UFO researcher in England. So she told me. And then I got a call. She was in town. I was living in the Bay Area at the time, and did I want to go out and meet her out in North Beach? And I said, sure, why not? So drove out to North Beach to, get a drink and just say howdy do. And so I get there, and she's there with, we're sitting there, we get to talk a little bit, and Dan, what's his name? Dan, you know what I'm
Dan
talking about,
Smith.
Erica?
Dan Smith.
Dan Smith.
Dan,
Dan
Dan
Smith,
Smith.
right?
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, so she's sitting there with Dan Smith, who I don't consider a well man in any way. And so we're sitting there talking, and in walks Jack Serfati. And I had just had a real problem with him. I'd been on the cover of the San Francisco Chronicle with Bernie Heisch, and they did an article about NARCAP, and Jack was fit to be tied. And I'd had problems with him because I couldn't get him to drop me off his email list. He damn well was not going to take me off that email list. It was not.
Yeah,
not going to happen.
it's an interesting email list.
And I just was like, no, I don't want to be on your email list. I can't do the math. I can't keep up with you, Jack. And so anyway, here all of a sudden I'm sitting in a room with these guys, and in walked a couple of other personalities that I'm not going to divulge here, but it was a very weird moment involving people that we never associated with as an organization, and in circumstances that I thought were a bit contrived. And I've had a few of those over the years.
Well, and can I just say, I mean, you said you're not going to mention them, but one of them was Kit Green. I'll mention him. You can blink once or yes, twice.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, put you on the spot. Okay, just look.
Yeah,
I can move on to the next question.
Okay,
But
that's knight to bishop 3. Okay.
but it's just the usual suspects,
Well, but these are unusual suspects. These are not people that anybody should really be associating with. Yeah, these are not people that you want to be associating with, and anybody that ends up with them in their orbit needs to be very careful. And I don't know so much about Jack. Okay, he's just a strong personality. He's the only person I know that has a manservant. Go figure. But I found actually sitting with him, it was fairly pleasant, and we had a nice conversation. It's all reasonable, but these people, are. They inform a lot of how ufology moves around, and they're not people that we should be associated with as experiencers or as researchers. All of these stories, all these people, all of this history and intrigue has nothing to do with getting the answers to this. If we want the answers to this, they happen.
Form of
these incidents happen every day. They happen every day in front of the whole world, and we can start right today and just start again as if it never happened before and still come to the same place. We don't have to engage these people. There's plenty of data in the public domain to come to a lot of understandings about this phenomenon. It's a matter of being able to synthesize the information into knowledge.
Right. And thank you for going
logic and research.
Thank you for talking about that, because I know that there are people in chat that were asking questions about Sarfati and mentioning some of these cast of characters, because unfortunately for those of us who we wade into this field, those are the usual suspects who are up to like you said, not just people to avoid. So thank you for clarifying that.
And I would just put the caveat that I don't necessarily feel that way about Jack. Okay, he's a very intelligent man, and he's a very good physicist, and he probably understands what he's trying to say better than anybody who's listening to him. And in that sense, I'm just not a good audience for him because I don't have the chops. I'm not a physicist. And he hasn't really been in the middle of anything particularly dark that I'm aware of, but the characters around him certainly have. And I just stay away from all that stuff. I don't want anything to do with it. I shored up the firewalls in my website and everything so that there was only one way you could reach me, which is directly. And if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me. But I'm not gonna. I don't allow access to the people behind me. Nobody gets into NARCAP and associates with the people in the group. It's just the way it is. So.
Good. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
That's my defensive posture.
Good.
We've had real issues, and there are real issues out there. And those of you who are doing the work should be well aware of that security is, along with transparency, security is critical. You need to look out for yourself. Be as transparent as possible. It's the thing that protects you the best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree with you on 100% on that. And so, what are your plans next? What big things do you have in store? And I want to just mention too that you talked to Avi Loeb the other day, and so which was exciting. What are you doing? Give us the rundown.
Well, I just had a few moments to ask him a couple of questions, and I had asked him if he was aware of the cluster observations at Hestelin and others, and he was. I'd asked him if he knew about Dr. Teodorani, and he kind of acquiesced that he did, but I've been talking to Dr. Teodorani and got a different story. So the whole point was to move work and recognition and opportunity to colleagues, associates, and friends that are equal to it. They're capable of it. Dr. Teodorani is an astrophysicist. He's been working on field research for a long time. He has good data, good information, and a good reputation. And frankly, Loeb and company would be remiss in not considering their work and looking at their studies. So I just do the right thing, back the people who are doing the good work.
And back the people that back you.
Well, there's that too. There's that too. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Either you're for me or against me.
So tell people again, Ted, narcap.org, you can go there
Right.
and look at the technical reports and learn more about things. There was a question in chat about and I'm sorry, I should scroll back, but I'm just trying to multitask here. But if you had a sighting, is there an organization or a place that you would feel would be a good bet to report that sighting to? And I honestly don't know.
I steer people toward API case files.
Okay.
Aerial phenomena investigations. That's where I sent them. It's API, and Paul's a good researcher. He will collect the data. He'll do the work. He's diligent and does due diligence. So if you got a photograph of it, or something, he'll do the math on it. He understands what he's doing. So if you really want to make sure that your case ends up in a data set that's strong and relevant, I would go to Paul's site at API.
Wonderful.
Aerial phenomena investigations.
Wonderful. Okay. Is there anybody else that you would turn to, or who has been your biggest inspiration in the subject?
Okay, now you're gonna have to say that again, because I'm getting.
I know. Yeah, no. I'm glad that we've kind of held out as long as we can with the weather up there. But who has been your biggest influence? Who has been the most positive influence in your time in this subject?
Oh, I would have to say me. No. Nobody's laughing. Yeah, but no, I've been influenced by a lot of people, experiencers, researchers, people like Joan Bird out in Montana, Dr. Bird. Um, Others, folks you wouldn't necessarily even know, but I mean, I grew up in Montana, so I know these people. But, there, others would, again, I got a lot mentoring with Dr. Haynes, and he was quite kind to me as a person for the most part. And then there was, and Dr. Valley's been pretty polite and refreshing and reasonable. I don't necessarily come down on the same side of things that he does, but the fact that these people took me in as an experiencer and gave me the opportunity to represent them meant a lot to me, and it gave me a kind of awareness that I could develop my insight with, so that I would understand what to say and what not to say, and why people are acting the way they're acting, and why the situation is the way it is, and all of that. And it was learning critical skills from people like that that really helped me ground myself, in the field. There are a lot of folks to look into. People like Michael Swords, he's an excellent researcher and a wonderful history. He and Robert Powell and some others wrote a book on history
Barry
of UFOs.
Greenwood and Richard Thiem.
Yeah, and exactly. And these are all people that we have a debt of gratitude to, and that you should be familiar with their work. Paul Hill wrote his book on unconventional flying objects. That was a terrific effort on his part to make that happen, and brought some credibility to the conversation. I remember when I was writing papers, or when I was publishing papers originally on the NARCAP website, I was trying to find citation and reference, and it was tough at first to find those technical papers to make citation and reference to, until I wrote enough of them myself that I could cite and reference. but Paul Hill, I'm just trying to come off the top of my head because so many of them are stinkers. If you know what I'm saying, there's an awful lot of people.
No, I don't know what you're saying.
Many of them are really carrying the ball.
Oh my gosh, that is funny. Yeah, no, it is interesting to see how many people have been in the subject, and people hold them up to this cult-like status and figures, and they just really over the years have done not a lot.
I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you.
Okay. Anyway, it's okay. It wasn't really that great of a comment, but no, I'm just kidding. So anyway, thank you, Ted, for being here and sharing your information. I want to just ask, we've got one more question for you in chat. And Peter, I'm sorry that we didn't get to your Nimitz question. I think that's up a ways. Maybe, Scott, you can scroll to that. We can ask that really quick. It's up at the top if you don't mind. See if you play. But what about Project Galileo? Ted, do you have hopes for that?
Oh, I do. I talked to Avi a couple of days ago, and I think that he's sincere, and I think the work is good. He's collecting funding, substantial funding, private funding, and the idea of transparency and openness is in his vocabulary. We'll see how it all comes out in the end, but I think that it's one of the best games in motion right now until we get the AIAA up and running. I'm fine with that. That's a good first step. They could look out and get something.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that'll be fun. It's an exciting time. Do you, and then Drew Williamson wanted me to ask you, does NARCAP look at historical cases, VFON, VFON reports, etc.?
I didn't even get that question.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Do you look at historical cases?
Yes, we collect them. Oftentimes, pilots will one of the first things when they retire is they'll come in and they'll show us their logbook or whatever, and I don't get a lot of pilot reports. I probably get on a big month, I might get a dozen, and a lot of them are just not actionable, or they're not. They're probably mundane, So I'll probably get a 2 or 3 actionable cases a year, maybe, where I can actually go get a FOIA request out, or that that they're recent enough that I can get information on. We collect historical cases. That just all goes into a data file where we're looking at trends, right? But we don't assign a lot of value to them unless there's actual data, radar data, or one of the really best cases that I've ever seen is the Minot B-52 UFO.com, Tom Tuline's study of the Minot case. That is probably one of the best aviation studies out there, and it's probably some of the best evidence for the unusual nature of UAP out there, and it includes radar, gun camera photos. It's good. And that's a historical case. Tom went and found the crew and found that information. It happened in 1967. Powerful case.
Right.
And
You're
there's probably
absolutely
a few
right.
of those.
Yeah. Tom, and I just have to throw this in there. I met Tom when I was visiting Gordon Lohr, my dear friend, and I want to just give a shout out to Gordon. Unfortunately, Gordon has been moved into a care facility because his health is failing, and this week he was told that he won't ever go home again. And so it's been a really sad week for Gordon. And so, as my dear friend, I want all of you just to kind of send him some love. And if you go to his website and purchase one of his incredible books, I know that would help him, because his health care is very, very expensive. And sorry to go off that, but when I met Gordon, Tom was there, Jan Aldrich was there, and what an interesting group of people. We had such a fun time, and Tom did an excellent job with that. So I'll have to get him back on. Maybe you can come on again too with him.
So when we were saying that historical cases, they do matter to a point, but what we really need is new data. And if you look at Dr. Teodorani wrote a paper, I published it on the NARCAP site, about it was an analysis of North American UFO databases, and it really rips them up, in terms of not being terribly good sources of information. It's a worthwhile read. I posted it on my Twitter feed here yesterday, I think it was, or the day before. But it really kind of demonstrates why we need to focus on new cases and new data. When you have witness reports where they're using all three terms, light, object, and craft, all in the same description, it's hard to really, what I mean? It's hard to come to some good conclusions with those types of beginnings. So we need a more rigorous data collection process that truly reflects what people are seeing. And Massimo was asking about that in his paper. So
Wonderful.
Let's look forward on UAP. They're not going to stop, and we're not going to miss anything necessarily. Like I said, if we started over with no data and just started only with new cases, we'd still end up in the same place.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for your work in the subject, and thanks for those long conversations that we have. It's a pleasure. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you in my life, and to learn from you and to bounce ideas off of you. I really appreciate that, and so thank you, Ted Roe. Go to narcap.org to learn more about Ted, his organization, and future work, which is exciting. And like Ted mentioned, this is an exciting time for the subject. We will see where it goes. Make sure that all of you are diligent and don't fall into the traps that I keep warning you about, because I have, and so has Ted. And I mean, it's, Scott's seen it. We've all been there, but this is a fun subject. Next weekend, I will be on the Big Phone Home with Luis Jimenez, and I'm really excited. There'll be other people. I think John Greenwald is going to be there, and quite a few people, so that will be a lot of fun. And I also have some exciting projects coming up. I can't tell you about them, but I'm just going to kind of tease you with that, because I don't know, I've got to give you something to think about. Next week, Michael Huntington will be on the show, which will be great. And I've actually trying to convince somebody that I've been talking with as well, that I really like to come on the show. But we've got good things coming up. So I want to, Scott, again, give you my love and all of our love, and just give your wife a hug. And we love you. Thanks for everything that you do, Scott, and your great graphics. Mario, we love you too. And so thank you all for asking these great questions in chat. You guys are wonderful. And Peter, I'm sorry I didn't get to your question, but yes, the Dark Alliance secrets. And since I am now the Empress of the Dark Cabal, I feel like I need to have a cup of tea and get a t-shirt, but maybe that'll be next week. And then definitely for Halloween, wait till you see my costume. That's going to be fun. So anyway, you guys be safe, and make sure that you get in there and click the subscribe button. You can go to UFOclassified.com to pledge your support. Becky and a few of you in chat and people that are listening have done that, and it really helps to keep the show on the air, because there are lots of hidden costs. And then also with my archiving project, it is important to get funds not only to house the archives, but to get scanners, to get things, means to digitize them in the best way possible, to preserve that for you, for all of us, to make sure history is not rewritten and that we learn things from it. I am very privileged to have the Androffel files. You hear me talk about that a lot. I didn't mention, Ted, and we'll talk about this, but how the friendship between Dick Haynes and Androffel, which was very interesting. I have the correspondence, very fun. But anyway, thank you, Steve, for being a show supporter. All you guys, Matthew, I'll be talking to you, Charles. Wonderful questions. So you guys stay safe, and maybe I'll actually end the broadcast, and maybe I'll actually play the outro, but I don't know. Stranger things have happened. So you guys, good night, subscribe, like, share, and have a safe weekend.
Night.